Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I am Marla DeYoung, Dean, Lewis H. Perry, Presidential Endowed Chair and Professor at the University of Utah College of Nursing. I am advisor to the Fellow Selection Committee for the 2025 application cycle and served as chair during the 2024 application cycle. On behalf of the Academy and its fellow selection committee, I'm excited to have this dialogue, which will feature two applicant sponsor groups, each comprised of an applicant and two sponsors. As many of you are aware, to apply to be a fellow, two American Academy of Nursing fellows must sponsor you. I would like to introduce you to our speakers. Brigadier General Gwendolyn Foster, Air Force Surgeon General, Director of Staff for the United States Air Force. Brigadier General Foster was inducted as a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing on November 2, 2024. Congratulations. She was sponsored by Clifton Kenon, Ranking Career Member, Office of the Administrator for the United States Agency for International Development, and Carolyn Curtis, founder and CEO for CARAB Company. Natasha Schaefer Solle is Research Associate Professor, Department of Medicine, Co-Deputy Director, Firefighter Cancer Initiative, Assistant Director, Behavioral and Community-Based Research Shared Resource at the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center and University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Congratulations, Dr. Solle, for being inducted as a Fellow of the Academy last month, and thanks to your sponsors, Roxana, Chicas, Assistant Professor at the Nell Hodgson Woodruff School of Nursing at Emory University, and Linda McCauley, Dean and Professor at the Nell Hodgson's Woodruff School of Nursing at Emory. As a policy organization and honorific society, the American Academy of Nursing welcomes diverse perspectives, experiences, and expertise. Together, we are transforming healthcare and propelling our policy priorities forward. Academy Fellows are inducted to the organization for their extraordinary contributions to improve health locally and globally. With more than 3,200 fellows, the Academy represents nursing's most accomplished leaders who work toward our mission to improve health and achieve health equity by impacting policy through nursing leadership, innovation, and science. Annually, the Academy receives hundreds of qualified applications from stellar candidates seeking to become a fellow. I recognize and thank all fellows who sponsor candidates. We recognize the time, effort, and care that goes into each sponsor statement and sponsors' dedication as they help shepherd their candidate through the fellowship application process. If you've not sponsored yet, I encourage you to consider sponsoring a candidate. As a reminder, fellows can sponsor 2 applicants per year. It's a tremendous honor to be recognized as a fellow, but with that honor comes responsibility to sponsor candidates. And although I know that many of you already are familiar with how the selection process works, I'll provide a brief overview. The application consists of applicant statements and responses to questions, the applicant's CV, and 2 sponsor statements. Applicants submit all their application materials through the Academy's online fellowship application portal. Detailed instructions are available on the Academy's website. The 2025 fellowship application cycle will open on January 7 and will close on February 11. Prior to application launch, Ideally, well in advance, candidates identify and work with their sponsors to prepare sponsor statements and application materials. Today, our panelists will provide insight into the sponsor-applicant relationship. Members of the Fellow Selection Committee and the International Subcommittee are responsible to review and score applications. Before reviewing applications, members of the Fellow Selection Committee and the International Subcommittee, which consist of elected and appointed members, are paired into teams of 2, which we call dyads. Each dyad is assigned specific applications to review. Each member of the dyad reviews and scores the applications individually. Then the dyad partners meet independently as a twosome to discuss their scores and try to reach consensus on any differing scores. Next, leaders of the Fellow Selection Committee review all of the scores, and then the full Fellow Selection Committee meets and comes together for a final selection meeting where there's a robust discussion about candidates and decisions are made on who will and who will not be recommended for induction. Importantly, and prior to all reviews, members of the Fellow Selection Committee identify any conflicts of interest, attend an orientation session, complete unconscious bias training, and participate in a mock review of an application. Now, let's hear from our speakers. If at any point you have a question for our speakers, please type it into the Q&A box. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible, but given a large audience, it's likely that we will not be able to address 100% of questions, but we will do our best. So, Clifton, I'd appreciate if you could begin by discussing your experience working with Gwen and Carolyn.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marla. And good day, good evening, good morning from wherever my colleagues are gathered from around the globe. It's a pleasure to be here. I was inducted into the Academy in 2021, and every year since then, it's been a pleasure to sponsor candidates. I've actually sponsored both Carolyn and Gwen, and that's my first point that I want to make today to everyone listening. I see it as not only a tremendous privilege, but also professional responsibility to sponsor people. The Academy is an organization that will only be as strong as the talent that we have in it and able to contribute to its aims and its goals. And every year, I am on the lookout for outstanding people that are going to help accelerate that mission and provide insight to how the Academy could be more effective. So that's where I always start at. Why should I sponsor a candidate? I sponsor a candidate because it's my professional responsibility. It supports the advancement of the science, and it helps the Academy to fulfill its goals. I actually pursue candidates. I believe that there are people that may not know about the Academy, particularly people that may be outside of the academic space. And as I am aware of people that are doing great work, I tell them about the Academy and I tell them what the Academy's mission is and explore their interests jointly. And I did that both with Carolyn and Gwen. Something came across from the Senate that said a midwife was going to be pinned as Brigadier General. And I thought, you know, for the first midwife to reach Brigadier General status in the Air Force, the Academy would benefit from having General Foster in there. And I approached her unapologetically and said, this is something that I want you to consider, and it will be an honor to support you. And as a result of that, I introduced General Foster to Carolyn and some others, and she explored with them, and they explored her career and her work, and she found her second sponsor through those introductions. So I would say, before I turn it over to my friend Nurse Curtis, as a sponsor and someone considering sponsoring someone, the best thing that you can do as a part of the process is to ensure that you believe in the candidate. And everyone that I've sponsored, I believed in their work and I believed that they were going to make contributions to the Academy. I make a pact with everyone that I sponsor that if I sponsor you, I will depend on you to keep sponsoring people and to be an active voice in the Academy. I would hope that you would join committees and be making contributions as I am trying to do. And with that pact, we move forward with the process, and it has been successful for my two candidates that I sponsored on the screen. I am going to turn over now to my dear friend and colleague, Nurse Carolyn Curtis, to talk about, how you work with candidates if you don't know their body of work and you're not familiar with them. So that's all for me. I'm happy to answer additional questions. And if we do run out of time, I do yield myself to further conversations with people via LinkedIn, and you should feel uninhibited about contacting me. Nurse Curtis, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Clifton. And I'm so happy that Brigadier General Foster is with us. This was very much a situation where Clifton contacted me and said, look, I have someone and we need a second sponsor. And I think that that is something to consider, is not leaving it on the responsibility of the candidate to find a sponsor, because they don't know who's necessarily in the academy. So we should be helping them by trying to find that second sponsor for them. For me, I really looked at the application that was presented and dissected it. And what I mean by dissecting it is really closely reviewing the application to see what things stand out. Because as you continue to look at someone's body of work, there are going to be areas that are going to stand out more than others. We had numerous conversations. And the other thing that's important is to validate what are your findings compared to what the candidate feels is their strength. There might be a difference, and that's okay. The candidate knows what their body strength is. And so if it differs from what you are reviewing, it's important to really hear out what the candidate has to say, because it's your job to highlight their work. It's not you determining what is the most important body of work for that candidate. It's for you to help the candidate to be able to highlight in the best way possible the work that has brought them to this point. Also, to really spend time. We've talked with Brigadier General numerous times to just also understand, keep in mind that a lot of the application, some of the language was unfamiliar because of the military. And so the language used in the military, if you don't understand, you need to make sure you understand that. And so it was to really verify with her, is this what I'm seeing? Is this what I'm reviewing? Does this mean this? Does this mean that? The other thing that was important for me to understand her body of work was I went online. I'd look up, I go online and see, I Google this person. Who is this person? Is what they say in their application really what's reflected with what's available online? And by reviewing her information online, I got to have a much better appreciation of the significance of her work. And as she moved from one location in the military to the next, it took on more and more responsibility. And if I had not looked at that, I would not have understood the level of responsibility that increased from one move to the next move to the next move. And so while I may have thought, oh, gee, this area looks like it's really her strength, it was, who is she commanding? And as Clifton and I said, look, you are being appointed, you've been nominated as Brigadier General. So there's clearly, you're clearly a candidate for the academy. It is how to translate now all of that into language that can be interpreted well and understood well by the panel. So those, I think the three things is to really review the application thoroughly, dissect it thoroughly so that you can see where are the areas of strength. Make sure you validate with your candidate what their area of strength is that they're applying for and that you are supporting that. And make sure that you look at all possible resources. I even read articles for another candidate. I read everything that I could get my hands on to really be able to understand their body of work. So that's how I did it.
No, I appreciate both of my sponsors. I will tell you that I could not have made it without them. And when they're talking about that body of work, they truly did dissect it. Because I will say, when I first started looking at the application, after, as you heard Clifton say, he was unapologetic. He definitely was like, ma'am, you have what is needed for the fellows. And so I really took that to heart. And when I started it, I was actually looking at it from a clinical and research perspective. So I was being very tactical, thinking that's what I needed to bring to the table for this application. And when I gave it to Clifton and Carolyn, they helped me see it from a broader picture and really focusing on my strengths as far as that military leadership. And Clifton had actually asked, when I was giving him all the things I've done in clinical, or when I was direct bedside, or the research I've done, he asked, he says, Gwen, can I see one of your evaluations, or can I see one of your decorations? And when I shared that with both of them, they were able to bring that out and said, that's what you need to focus on. That's where you need to show your leadership, the responsibilities you've had, and tie that into the impacts that you've made across the enterprise for the community, for the nation. And so they helped me actually pivot and look at it in a different light. And so once we started doing that, they continue to ask me questions to refine it, because as you heard Carolyn say, is in the military, there is a different language that we speak. We are very, straight to the point. We always say bottom line up front. But this is where they were really pulling out those details of everything that I had did, and making sure that I was able to tie that to the questions, as well as make sure that I was speaking in plain language. So if you weren't wearing a uniform, that you would be able to understand it. And what really helped me keep it succinct to what was needed for the application was everything that I wrote, I went back. How is it tied back to my military leadership? How is it tied to the question? So that enabled me to stay within the constraints of what was required. And again, just having Carolyn and Clifton on this journey with me has been incredible, because again, it would not have been impossible without them both by my side. So thank you.
You're on mute, Marla.
Thank you so much, Clifton, Gwen, and Carolyn, for sharing those insights. Now I'd like to turn it over to our next applicant sponsor group. Roxana, Linda, and Natasha, could you please share your perspectives regarding how you collaborated on the application process?
I think you're on mute, Dean McCauley.
So it was a very exciting process. I am always interested in nurses that have not traveled a traditional path. Clifton mentioned earlier, not everyone is, if they're not in academia, really understands the ins and outs of Academy membership. And I was fortunate when I was nominated and got in the 1990s that I had left nursing for a while and was in a research institute. And some nursing leaders had watched me and saw me go into a non-traditional type of setting where I was the only researcher and the only nurse. And out of the kindness of their heart, they were so impressed that I would do that. They reached out to me and said, we'd like to nominate you for the Academy. And I had heard of the Academy. I didn't know what was involved, but I remembered the generosity of the women who did that, because there are a lot of nurses who travel in non-traditional paths And so fast forward 25 years later, I still search for nurses that kind of are doing things, shall I say, outside the box, but are very impactful. And that I think it's critically important that nursing own its excellence wherever the nurses are practicing. And so in that case, I had discovered this fantastic nurse researcher down at the University of Miami, and really we did a cold call to Natasha. We were so impressed with her work, and we did a cold call saying, "Would you, we think you should be in the Academy of Nursing." And Roxana did a lot of that work. Roxana, if you want to take over, she actually made the call to Natasha. And why did you do that, Roxanne, other than I mentioned it to you, but what did you learn about doing that?
So I got inducted into the academy in 2023, and Dean Linda McCauley was one of my sponsors. And for a long time, I had never thought about myself as a sponsor as far as like nominating people for awards or recognitions. And I heard Dean McCauley once say how important it is that we sponsor people and how it's important to nominate people because that helps advance people's career. And I thought maybe I am at the stage of my career where I should be doing that, nominating other people. And so that's part of the reason why I contacted Natasha, because I wanted to sponsor someone, and her CV speaks for itself. There aren't very many occupational nurses, and she is one that's quite successful and has contributed a lot to occupational health in the nursing profession. So I thought that she was an excellent candidate for the academy. And so now I think that I saw someone ask, how soon can you start sponsoring people? Well, as soon as the next year, once you get into the academy, you should start sponsoring. Hopefully, that's something that you continue to do every year. And sometimes you won't know the candidate, on a one-on-one basis for a long time, but you probably have admired their work. So like I've admired Natasha's work. And that's one way of really speaking about the person in the application, talking about their trajectory and what they've done and what they will contribute and how you see them contributing to the academy and the nursing profession.
Well, I just want to add, I feel so fortunate, so lucky, and, to receive that call. And it was a cold call that I didn't know what was happening, but felt so fortunate. Being a fellow of the Academy is something that I had, thought about for a very long time, and thought, well, maybe in a much, later in my career, as Dr. McCauley mentioned, I'm a little bit off the path. I'm not in a school of nursing. And so my thought process was, I need to find leaders in nursing that I can work with to then possibly get sponsored, years down the road. So I think, as someone who is looking to be a fellow, to look at other options, not just the traditional of I work with nurses and nurse leaders, and that's how I should approach it, but kind of doing the opposite of what happened, but making the call to other people, and really putting yourself out there and saying, like, this is the work I'm doing. I'm proud of the work. I think it's impactful. Would you be willing to sponsor me? And so that was something that Dr. McCauley and Dr. Chicas, by reaching out, really gave me a lot of confidence, and I think just more drive of how we can build the nursing profession and drive nursing science. So I think, from taking anything from this, webinar, is when you're looking at it, if it's something you really want, to look at different angles and look at other fellows that are in your profession or in your area and reach out to them. I think the best thing that can come from this is networking and connections. And, although our relationship is, not super long standing, I really truly believe that Dr. McCauley and Dr. Chicas, that we work together and collaborate for many years to come, and our relationship now is, you know, very solidified. So, yeah.
I would agree, Natasha.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Roxana, Linda, and Natasha, for sharing your insights. I'll just make a couple brief comments. What I heard so far is some really nice comments from our panel members about the responsibility of current fellows in seeking out individuals who come from all areas of nursing. And I've seen some comments in the chat about this, and I think something that we want to really emphasize is that the Academy is for nurses who are making strong contributions to science, to policy, to our profession. And that could occur through a multiple number of roles. So our fellows are elected officials, they're state and federal political appointees and government officials, they're hospital chief executive, chief nurse executives, university presidents, chancellors, deans, researchers, entrepreneurs, individuals who are involved in law and the practice of law, all different kinds of ways. And so I really do hope that we all hear that it's not just for nursing academia, and it's not just for nurses who are affiliated or working within colleges and universities. The other thing that was pointed out is the importance of really thinking very carefully and self-critiquing and self-assessing one's body of work. And maybe the most important impact of one's work are not the obvious. And so if we think deep, or if we have discussions with others, they can help us explore the true impact that we're making and the unique contributions of that. We also heard using language that can be commonly understood outside of our particular disciplines, whether that is a clinical discipline or a military career or any other number of ways that sometimes we can fall into practice or research or policy specific verbiage that might not be commonly understood by others. We've also talked about owning our excellence and really thinking about how us nominating fellows propels and accelerates the work of the Academy. And this is what it's really about, right? The way that I like to say this is once fellows are inducted, we celebrate them and it's a joyous time, but the work is only beginning because now we have a new voice as fellows. We have new relationships, we have new opportunities to move the work of the Academy forward in ways that benefit our profession. So I will begin to review the questions in the Q&A. Thank you for those who have put those in, and I will direct them to the different members of our panel, and I hope that we're able to answer many of them. And I think some of them that we have already talked about, and so I might bypass a couple of those. One question is advice for preparing ourselves to be ready to apply. What sort of things are you looking for? Are there any benchmarks as one thinks about preparing to apply? And I know that sometimes our candidates actually haven't even thought about it from that way because someone has approached them. But I'm wondering, perhaps Gwen, you could give us some insight into how might you prepare yourself to be ready to apply?
Thinking about that, because to your point, I just it was saying that I wasn't even thinking about applying. Like later in my career, I'm still like in the trenches, I'm not there yet. That's really how I looked at it when Clifton had approached me. And so I will say that you are there, and that take ownership of what you've done and the impacts that you're making, and document that, quantify that, and that'll help you be ready. I already had the what was needed for the application. I just had to find it to be able to give it and modify it to fit the application, but it was there. So if regardless of what discipline you may be in, you have the resources there, and it's just really just looking at it more from a higher level. How does that fit? Looking at it from the impact to nursing, to healthcare, to you. And when you're looking at the academy, looking at their mission, that really helps. How are you meeting that and documenting that? That really help like hone in how to use what I already had to do the application.
Thank you so much. There's a question about, could you share the benefits fellows receive from joining and being inducted? And Linda, I'm wondering if you might like to answer that question.
So the first benefit is the excitement of the induction night. It's just incredible to be recognized by your peers. It's a special night that you would want your family and supporters to celebrate with you. It is an unforgettable night that I've never met a person inducted in the academy who just was not thrilled, absolutely over the top with the honor. But then second, you know, I would encourage you to look at the academy. It's not just an honorific. In other words, I achieved this, check the box. Look at it as a professional organization. And the American Academy of Nursing, in terms of influencing health policy and national leadership, is so incredibly important, because in one body, you have, yes, you do have the academic group from our universities, but you have leaders of hospital systems, not just in the United States, but across the world. And you have so many leaders in the federal government, military service. And so it is the richness and diversity of the membership and what you can learn from participating in a special emphasis group. If you are inducted to become a member of the special emphasis group that aligns most with you, and that gives you kind of a small group to interact with and really speak to each other about what policy papers need to come out of the national academies. So it is a professional organization, but it's more than that. It is a voice. It is our megaphone to really influence things at the national and international level. And everyone that's been inducted is absolutely capable of having influence and using their voice, or they wouldn't be inducted. So that's the largest benefit, I think.
Thank you, Linda. I'll pivot to a question that has to do with preparation of the application. And Clifton, I think this would be a great question for you. What are the types of most compelling statements that a sponsor can use to highlight the candidate's accomplishments?
So in thinking about the candidate's accomplishments and what you're going to highlight, the first thing I tell everyone is the criteria are what the academy puts out. Never mind what people say, never mind what, people coming up with things that don't exist in the criteria and saying, you need to have a RO1 or you need to have this. I tell people we are going to take the criteria in a similar way that I take a federal grant application when someone is applying for it. And I am going through that criteria with the candidate and with the co-sponsor. And when we write those letters, we are highlighting outcomes. We are focusing on how the candidate's outcomes are part and parcel with the mission of the academy, how those outcomes are advancing the science and the influence of nursing. And when I look at it from that sort of micro paradigm of these are the things that we want to put forth in an application, the candidate has had this impact, the outcomes associated with that are this, and as such, this is positioning the science and the profession in this way. And I think those are noteworthy statements for people to aspire to that are writing sponsorship letters and even helping their candidate to frame their work. Because often candidates come to the table and they have done so many things that have had such, you can't write about all of them within the confines of what is allowed. So when looking at how you actually bring them all together to pair the outcomes with the influence and the advancement of the science, it does help pare it down and really hone in to make your statements that much more remarkable.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Another question has to do with some specifics of the application. Someone mentioned that there is repetition across the responses to some of the questions. And so the question really gets at, is repetition good? Should we, as applicants, repeat information, or should we use discrete information? And I will add to that questions that I've heard also is how much similarity should there be in the sponsor statements? And so, Roxana, I'm wondering if you could share some thoughts about addressing some of the key questions that our applicants address in the application.
Yeah, I think repetition is good, but in each section, you just have to elaborate or pivot a little bit more to what that question is asking. So, for example, so I applied in 2022 and I didn't get in. And my focus was really on advocacy that I've done. And so the next year, I applied again, and this time I focused more on my research. And I didn't have an R01, but I've had some publications and I worked on big grants. And so I really focused on research. But I think another important thing is that you weave like your personal story into your application, because it gives it a human touch when you weave your story and how it is that you've gotten to where you have gotten. And then your mentors, your sponsors will also kind of touch on what you've mentioned in your application, but in a different manner, in their own words, and what it is that they've seen is so powerful about your journey. Your professional journey and getting into the academy. So yes, there's going to be repetition, and that's okay. Just kind of change the words and emphasize certain things more than others in certain sections.
Thank you, Roxana.
Maria, may I add something about that? It's not unusual for the the sponsors, if they know each other, to plan ahead of time and decide, they're both speaking about the applicant, but one will agree to, I'm going to focus on A and B if you really strongly, if you will focus on C and D. Some nominators have done that in the past.
Linda, that was beautiful, because I was just going to address a question like that toward you. So thank you for anticipating that. And I think, your point is right. It's a dialogue. It's a getting to know, and again, accentuating what you've done in the past in a way that lines up with the characteristics of fellows and one's potential then to, as a fellow, serve the academy moving forward, as we have talked about. I know that this is, one of the things that I think is sometimes the hardest to come across in an application. And let's be honest, I think most of us find it difficult to talk about ourselves and to assess ourselves positively. And so there's some questions that do really get at this idea of impact. So how significant should the impact be? Or should the number of impacted individuals from our work be in the thousands? What about work that is ongoing, that perhaps is well underway but might not be completed for a period of time? So I'm wondering about that idea of impact. And Natasha, do you have some thoughts perhaps that you could share with us about describing impact?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, as Clifton mentioned, I don't think it's as critical to focus on numbers or metrics, but really you know, impact and what change you're making, whether it be in a community of interest, whether it be, in the nursing field, whether it be in the community, or policy change. So I think thinking about your story and, when I wrote mine, I always think about not necessarily writing something, but if I was talking to someone and I'm telling them about my background or about the work that I do, what am I most excited about and what, would get people excited to hear about? And, the more you think about that and more of as a conversation, you're telling, well, yeah, I wrote this grant or I wrote this paper, but how did it make change? And so thinking of those things and looking back at the mission of the academy and how does some of the work that you're doing align with that, is really important. So thinking about changes like that and not so much, it's I've enrolled 1,000 people into this study or I've got this grant, but looking at the things that you've done, because a lot of times, you're right. It's hard for people to describe and praise themselves. But if you look back at the work that you're doing, and say like, oh yeah, we did do that. And, tell that story and from where you started to where you are. And you will see like, wow, we've made a lot of impact, whether it be in a hospital setting. And now because of that, we've had policy change, or we've been working with this group of community members and now they've had certain screening. So I think telling your story and what gets you excited, it'll translate in the application.
I'd like to
Thank
add a
you.
little bit to that as well. Oftentimes when I am not academia, my work was through my work with the government and my implementation. And when you look at reports and there might be, oh yes, we saw X numbers. The big question to ask is, so what? And that is the question to ask with the work that you're doing. What is the so what about it? What did it do? What did it change? How did it change? That I think is the big one, because I would say, okay, this is great, but so what?
I love that, Carolyn, because I was thinking about directing a comment your way, and I'll just build on what you were saying. So, as a sponsor, perhaps a first-time sponsor, working with an applicant, how can a sponsor help a potential applicant really articulate their impact, or think about what the true impact is? And then alongside that, how much weight does that sponsor's statement have as part of the application, realizing that the sponsors are anonymous to members of the selection committee?
So I think it kind of goes back to what I just mentioned, the so what, helping them to see the so what. A lot of times we look at our work and we kind of leave it at the 9 to 5 and the day's done. But then what happened after that 9 to 5 or that, shift work or whatever, wherever you're working, what happened after that? How did it contribute to a change? how did it contribute to a policy change? Did it contribute, and that policy change can be in numerous locales. Did that affect hospital policy? Did that affect state or government policy? Did that affect national or international policy? That is where to help see how that work contributed to each of these things. In regard to the sponsor letter, I'll let Clifton help with this one, but we are really, with that sponsor letter, you are being able to validate what this candidate is saying. You are really kind of responsible to be able to say, everything that I've looked at, everything that I've reviewed, everything that I've discussed with this candidate gels. And I'm seeing that there's been this kind of change. I think that this candidate really should be inducted as a fellow. And so your letter is really kind of bringing together everything. Keep in mind, I've never served as a panelist on the selection committee, but I do think that that sponsor letter helps to bring some summary to the body of work that has been done by the candidate. I also think that if you've not spent time with your candidate, that you're not going to be able to write a strong letter. It was after many meetings with Brigadier General Foster, even with Clifton and us, like, just massaging things and really, really reviewing the application, that we could really write that letter. And so I think it's going to depend upon the amount of time that you're spending with the candidate as well, and really understanding their body of work.
Thank you
If
so
I
much.
could just add, Carolyn, we talk about, this was our life at USAID, and I'm talking about scale and the ability to take something to scale. At the Academy meeting this year, a wonderful young lady walked me back to my hotel because we just got caught up in conversation. And she said to me, how do I know if my work is strong enough? And I said to her, I want you to pretend that I've got $5 million to invest in your work right now. And on this walk from the Marriott back to the Hyatt, you need to convince me why I should give you my $5 million to invest in your work. And what is the potential for your work to be implemented in places beyond what it is? And in that walk, the person had to think about how to sell their work, their ability, and the potential future scalability of their work. I think that's a valid starting question to help with some of these conversations, to help people be motivated to talk about why me and why my work. And I'm going to use that in the future. It was a really cool sort of micro hackathon that we did walking in DC later than probably what we should have been.
Thank you. And on the topic of sponsors, sometimes applicants are seeking out sponsors, and there's a question about whether the panel frowns on sponsors both being from the same institution. Now, that will generally be difficult to know because, again, the names of the sponsors are blinded to the panel. But in terms of thinking about potential sponsors, I'm wondering, Roxana, if you could maybe give us some thoughts about some advantages or disadvantages of choosing sponsors from the same institution, but even more so, what are you looking for when thinking about contacting a potential sponsor? What are the most key components of that?
Yeah, I think it's fine for sponsors to come from the same institution. I think the main qualification is that the sponsors need to be fellows of the Academy. And when you are trying to select a sponsor, I think that, if this is a code kind of email that you're sending, hopefully there's some type of connection that you may have, whether it's, we're both members of the National Academy of Medicine. So I'm wondering if if I could talk to you about potentially sponsoring me, or we both kind of work in community-based participatory research and I would like to apply to the academy. Will you consider sponsoring me? So just find a connection with the person that you plan to contact. I think it's the most important thing. And then having these conversations, as Clifton pointed out earlier, and Dean McCauley did, about talking about strategizing who will talk about what, in what manner, and how the story will evolve. I think that one of the most important things is just knowing how to tell your story in your application and showing that impact that you're having.
Thank you, Roxana. And I know we keep talking about impact, right? Because it's such an important part of the application, and I think it can be challenging. Maybe I'll direct this question back towards you, Clifton. You've talked about this before, but questions keep coming up, so that tells me that it's important to our audience. So, is impacting policy more important than impacting practice or excellence in outcomes? So any additional thoughts that you have in terms of the type of impact, because people have.
So I don't think those things need to be mutually exclusive. I always point people back to take the criteria of what is required to become a fellow. Do not read into that. Do not have endless exploratory conversations about what that means. The fellow selection committee, our inclusivity committee, and other powers to be at the academy have put tremendous work forth to make this process transparent and clear. And when you go by that, it sort of removes some of these questions about what's most important and what's weighted. Look at your body of work and what you believe has outcomes at the regional, state, national, and international level, has ability to be scale and shows promise for scale. And between you and your sponsors, that is what I would focus on. In my application, it was some of praxis and some of policy. In other applications, it's been some of both on either side. What I will say may be helpful to everyone is, because the academy review process is masked, I'm sort of hesitant about using the word blinded, but because it is masked, I would say it may be worthwhile to have someone who has not been involved in helping you with your application to read your application that doesn't know you personally, it doesn't know your body of work. And that may help you be motivated to clarify things that when someone is reading that may not have been in conversations with you for the last 4 months, are they able to ascertain the same things that you're trying to get across? So I would just encourage people, as you think about showing your impact, have someone in the academy read your application in a fully masked way and get their feedback if they are interpreting what you believe is your impact in the same way, because that's what the fellow selection committee is going to have to do.
Thank you so much. An interesting question that I'm going to direct toward you, Gwen. I know you have had many different roles during your military career, many different positions in many different locations, different mission areas. We have a question from someone who wonders, how far back can an applicant include their previous work that's made a significant impact? So my interpretation of the question, do we reach back a few years or decades, or how did you maybe think about your career and which of the many impactful contributions you've had to the military to actually include in your application?
No, and I think it just amplifies what Clifton was saying, because once looking at the criteria and honing that, and really what I focus on was my leadership impacts throughout. So I went back to when I actually started being in leadership or command. And so that's how I had a fine point of where I was going to start. So that way I didn't go back too far. And so I think as you're looking at what impact you're bringing to the table, that will help you determine where do you go in your career to begin that story. Because it really is just telling your story and then tying it to the impact and outcomes, as everyone has been saying. So that's how far I went back.
Thank you. And we're still talking about impact. So another question, and this is a good one, does the impact need to be related to the applicant's paid work or are unpaid and extracurricular activities and contributions to the profession things that are important to highlight in the application? Linda, what do you think about that question?
That's a great question. And I would think my personal opinion is absolutely not. Because sometimes the volunteer work that nurses do, and when they present themselves as nursing and they use their nursing voices, it can have tremendous impact. And so I would definitely believe that it is inclusive and could be described quite well. There's a couple of things just quickly, I know our time's about up, is think about the things that are important to our country right now. And those areas that nurses can have such a huge impact in, whether it's violence or access to care or marginalized communities. And if there's any way that you can line up the impact that you've had as a nominee to actually show the wonderful thing that nursing does, they can reach communities that no one else can reach, and too often their impact in these communities go unrecognized. So, and it's not always paid. It may not be your day job, but it's critically important.
Thank you. I know our time is somewhat limited, so I'm going to try to get to a couple more questions. Carolyn, I'm wondering if this, your thoughts about, is there a protocol in asking an Academy member to be one's sponsor? And I think that's a good question. So how might you advise someone about how they might begin such a conversation?
So I'm thinking in doing so is to share with that prospective sponsor about the candidate that you're excited about, to help them come on board with you. I think that's, you want to make sure that when you're spending time that you are really helping to have that candidate move forward. And so I think the first step would be able to share the excitement that you have around another candidate. I know when I was approached by Clifton, Clifton and I have worked together for many years. We know each other very well. And so it was a thing of, yes, let's do this together. We've got this great candidate. Let's do our best to help to support her application and get her inducted. So I think it's knowing your candidate, knowing that they do meet the mark, and that engaging someone else, that their time will be well spent, that you don't have to have them toil over this application and think, why did you ask me for this? So I think generally that would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much. There's several other questions that I know we're not going to have a chance to get to. I'd like to address a couple that I've seen, and I'll put together in one question. There are several who have asked, I am a nurse theorist, or I am a nurse manager, or I am an entrepreneur. Is that of value to the Academy? And the answer is yes. The Academy is inclusive of all the disciplines and the areas in which professional nurses practice. And so there is not one particular way that applications look. Having looked at hundreds of applications in my now 6 years on the fellow selection committee, They're all very different, right? We are a diverse group of beautiful professionals who are making incredible impact in healthcare. And so, what's important, as we have been talking about for the last hour, is demonstrating impact through whatever your work has been. And so I would encourage you for all of you to think of yourselves as future fellows, and please do reach out to individuals who are fellows, reach out to our incredible staff at the Academy, and those of us who are happy to continue the conversation about how you might be a successful applicant. So I hope that you found this dialogue helpful. I'm honored again to have represented the Fellow Selection Committee. The diverse expertise and professionalism of the committee members is outstanding, and their time and commitment are invaluable resources that greatly contribute to the success and growth of the Academy. I thank our speakers for sharing their excellent insights today. A recording of this webinar will be posted to the Academy's website by the end of the week, so you can visit that at www.AANnet.org for more information. And thank you so much for joining us today.